The scent of dry desert air and the smooth cold granite of the countertop were the final things I registered before the world tilted. I was 51 years old, a woman who had staked her entire life and identity on a beautiful, intricate lie. For 25 years, I, Serena Hayes, had been the silent, supportive partner, the woman who traded her own professional aspirations for the comfortable public elegance of a marriage to Marcus Sterling, a celebrated and ruthless investment banker in Scottsdale, Arizona. Our life was a curated masterpiece of wealth, power, and social perfection. The sprawling, custom-built mansion overlooking the McDowell Mountains, the endless country club dinners, the assumption of eternal, unshakable success. My reward, my promised forever, was the stability and dignity of that shared life. I had held up his fragile ego, navigated his complex social world, and ensured his public face remained spotless, believing that the unspoken covenant of our long history was an unbreakable bond. The covenant shattered not with a fight, but with a piece of paper slipped discreetly across the breakfast table one humid morning in August 2023. It was a unilateral filing for divorce, accompanied by a brutally cold, 4-page letter from his attorney, detailing his claim for the equitable distribution of assets. Equitable to Marcus meant the absolute minimization of my 25 years of emotional and social labor. The letter stated, in stark, unfeeling legal jargon, that since I had foregone a formal career to manage the household and social calendar, my contribution was non-monetary and therefore limited under Arizona's community property laws. He offered me the exact humiliating legal minimum: a small fixed monthly alimony, the old Jeep, and a signature on the deed to the mountain mansion, which he claimed was entirely his premarital property due to a series of carefully timed refinancing transactions. The man who had promised me forever and gave me a life of elegant servitude was now giving me nothing but the clothes on my back and a mountain of legal bills. The betrayal was immediate, profound, and absolute, but the crushing shock quickly gave way to a cold, frightening clarity. Marcus wasn't just leaving me for a younger woman, though that, I soon discovered, was part of it. A woman 30 years his junior, a new financial analyst at his firm. He was actively attempting to erase my 25 years of existence for financial gain, ensuring his vast fortune remained untouched. He had planned this for months, perhaps years, using his legal and financial expertise to construct a financial fortress that he thought was impenetrable. The man who was once my husband had reduced me to a disposable commodity, smiling as he delivered the final, crippling financial blow. I didn't waste time on tears or confrontation. Shouting would have given him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. My response was quiet, analytical, and surgical, immediately channeling the suppressed ambition of my youth, a master's degree in public relations and crisis management I never utilized, into a singular purpose: to dismantle the financial and social fortress Marcus had built his entire life around. Marcus Sterling's greatest asset was not his portfolio. It was his pristine, celebrated public image, the image of the shrewd, ethical, family values banker. I knew his greatest professional fear was not a market crash, but a scandal, the public exposure of the malicious deceit that lay beneath his polished facade. My revenge would be different from the legal fight he anticipated. It would be a calculated, systematic humiliation designed to cost him far more than money: his unassailable reputation. I knew the structural weaknesses in Marcus's fortress. Over 2 decades, I had been the keeper of his secrets, the cleaner of his messes, the silent witness to his small ethical compromises. I had been the one who handled the panicked phone calls, the discreet payments, and the quiet destruction of incriminating documents. I possessed the unwritten history of Marcus Sterling's professional life, a history that, if exposed, would instantly invalidate his reputation and destroy his ability to attract the wealthy, integrity-obsessed clients upon which his entire fortune rested. He promised me forever and gave me nothing, so I made sure his forever ended in absolute, total humiliation. The quiet wife was gone. The relentless crisis manager had finally been activated. The first phase of the counterattack was not legal, but archival. Marcus, in his arrogance, assumed that because I lacked access to his corporate servers, I had no evidence. He forgot that every significant financial transaction, every ethical gray area, every discreet payment he made, was done through paper checks, physical documents, and private email addresses I controlled and managed for 2 decades. My role as his social manager was also the perfect cover for being his personal archivist of secrets. I had meticulously filed and stored copies of every ambiguous document, every strange invoice, and every panicked note, believing them to be records of our shared history. They were not. They were the blueprints for his destruction. I retreated from the mansion to a small, furnished apartment in Phoenix, taking only 2 things: my clothes and 8 carefully labeled file boxes containing the raw chronological history of Marcus Sterling's ethical lapses. I hired a sharp, discreet divorce attorney, Elena Ruiz, but gave her specific instructions. We will not engage in the usual divorce war yet. We will file a standard, amicable response, allowing Marcus to bask in the confidence that he has won the financial battle. Our real war will be fought in the shadows, against his professional image. My attention focused on the most vulnerable area of Marcus's reputation, his discreet payment of a massive settlement 10 years prior to Mr. Thomas Klein, his former deeply disgruntled business partner. Klein had accused Marcus of securities fraud and insider trading after a real estate venture collapsed, a charge that Marcus had buried with a 7-figure, non-disclosure-bound payment, ensuring Klein's absolute silence. I knew the settlement check, the NDA draft, and the initial email exchange confirming the payment were still in my file boxes. This was the foundation of his integrity lie. If I could expose the reality of that fraudulent settlement, the entire investment banking community would question his decades of reported success. The challenge wasn't obtaining the information. It was deploying it without violating the terms of the NDA that I, as his wife, had tacitly protected for years. I needed a way to alert the relevant authorities, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and, more importantly, the financial media to the specific existence and nature of the Klein settlement, forcing them to launch an investigation, while keeping my own hands completely clean. I needed an external actor who could withstand his legal retaliation. I reached out to David Chen, a former financial journalist I had befriended years ago during a charity event. David was now running an influential but independent financial watchdog blog in New York. I contacted him anonymously, using a secure, untraceable line, introducing myself as a concerned party with verifiable, highly sensitive information regarding a long-buried fraud case involving a prominent Scottsdale banker. I didn't send him the documents directly. Instead, I gave him a precisely worded narrative. Look for a 7-figure, off-book settlement paid in 2013 by Marcus Sterling to Thomas Klein, involving the Delphi Real Estate Fund. The payment was made to silence a charge of insider trading and securities fraud. The primary evidence lies in a draft NDA document and a canceled check that, if authenticated, would prove the fraud. I was giving David the map to the treasure, forcing him to do the digging and ensuring that the public exposure came from a credible, external source. Marcus would never suspect his quiet, discarded wife was the author of his coming professional destruction. The time for silent endurance was over. The time for calculated, documented exposure has finally arrived. The strategic silence from my end, the focus on amicable divorce and equitable settlement, was a deceptive veil. I maintained this composure in every single communication with Marcus and his legal team, meticulously cultivating his overconfidence. My phone calls to his lead attorney, Mr. Douglas, were brief and professionally dry, always ending with the assurance that I was merely seeking a quiet resolution. This allowed Marcus to divert his extensive legal team's attention entirely toward the financial minutiae of minimizing my alimony, neglecting the looming catastrophic threat I was mobilizing against his professional reputation. This strategic misdirection was the first and most crucial step in my plan. The moment the anonymous tip landed in David Chen's inbox, the slow tectonic plates of Marcus Sterling's perfect financial life began to shift. David Chen was a ruthless, ambitious journalist. The prospect of exposing a decade-old 7-figure fraud involving a high-profile investment banker in Arizona was professional dynamite. He immediately began his investigation, using the precise markers I had provided, the names, the dates, the Delphi Fund, to pull public records and cross-reference financial filings, tracing the ghost of the settlement I had pointed him toward. My part was done. The truth was now an external force, accelerating toward Marcus on its own momentum. I, meanwhile, had to maintain the charade of the amicable divorce. I was the quiet, dignified wife, seeking an equitable separation, completely oblivious to the gathering storm. This was crucial, as Marcus, in his confidence, needed to believe the financial battle was his primary focus, diverting all his legal resources toward minimizing my alimony. He called me once, his voice condescendingly cordial. "Serena, I trust you received the counteroffer from my lawyer. It's a very fair proposal, all things considered. No need to drag this out, right?" I replied with a cool, practiced neutrality. "I received it, Marcus. My lawyer is reviewing the details. I simply want what's fair." That simple reply, the lack of anger, the focus on fairness, was exactly what he expected, reinforcing his arrogant belief that he had successfully neutered my threat. My focus immediately turned to the second, more immediate flaw in his fortress, the mountain mansion itself. Marcus had proudly claimed the house as his premarital property, due to a complex series of REFI transactions, a fortress of legal jargon designed to exclude me from its value. But I, as the signature on every single loan and the one who managed the mortgage payments, knew the paper trail. I pulled the archives, the original deed, the subsequent refinancing applications, and the affidavit of intent to use property as marital residence, a document I had signed, and he had countersigned, during the final refinancing 8 years ago. This document, legally binding under Arizona law, directly contradicted his current claim. It wasn't the kind of document he could easily erase, as it was recorded with the county. I instructed Elena Ruiz, my divorce attorney, to file an immediate aggressive motion, not to claim the house entirely, but to claim 100% equity in the property under the principle of equitable distribution, citing the affidavit of intent and the fact that Marcus had explicitly used the house as an asset in obtaining subsequent corporate loans, benefiting directly from my status as his wife. Elena, initially focused on the alimony fight, was astonished by the detailed, specific evidence I provided. "Serena, this affidavit completely undermines his premarital claim. You've given me a wrecking ball." I replied, "Use it, Elena. Make him fight for the foundation while I burn down the house." The legal motion landed like a grenade on Marcus's high-priced legal team. They were forced to pivot instantly from attacking my alimony demands to defending the multi-million-dollar house, an asset they had carelessly assumed was untouchable. His lawyer, Mr. Douglas, called Elena in a panic. "This is a gross misinterpretation of the law, Ms. Ruiz. This is a malicious, vindictive maneuver." Elena calmly read the relevant section of the affidavit of intent, letting the lawyer hear the sound of his client's financial fortress collapsing under the weight of his own signature. I had created the perfect pincer movement. The media was closing in on his professional integrity, and the courts were closing in on his most valuable personal asset. Marcus Sterling was about to learn that the one person who knew all his vulnerabilities was the one he had underestimated most. I know this might just be a voice in your ear, but if you've ever felt the absolute crushing weight of a stolen promise or fought to reclaim your dignity after being dismissed, then you belong right here. We are a community built on the bedrock of turning personal pain into strategic power. Every time you hit that subscribe button, you are casting a vote for truth and for the endurance of self-respect. And please, tell me in the comments below, what's the most important secret you ever held that gave you power? Your stories are the fuel that keeps this channel dedicated to the silent, victorious battles of transformation. Thank you for being here. The strategic brilliance of the two-front attack, the legal challenge to the mansion's ownership and the media investigation into the Klein settlement, lay in the fact that Marcus could only defend one front at a time. The legal crisis was immediate and demanded his attention and money. The media crisis was slow, insidious, and threatened his entire reputation, the very source of his future wealth. He chose, predictably, to prioritize the immediate financial threat, pouring resources into defending the premarital status of the mountain mansion. This allowed David Chen in New York to finalize his investigation completely unchecked, tracing the ghost of the Delphi Fund settlement to the doorstep of Sterling's firm. The pressure on Marcus was becoming unbearable, precisely as intended. His legal team was engaged in a desperate, expensive defense of the mountain mansion, trying to argue that the affidavit of intent I provided was merely a standard legal document and not a true reflection of the property's status. They were losing ground, forced to spend massive amounts of billable hours defending a claim that I had meticulously documented. Meanwhile, In New York, David Chen's blog was teasing a massive impending exposé on a prominent Arizona banker and a 9-figure settlement scandal. The two crises were compounding, turning Marcus's life into a high-stakes, unmanageable nightmare. He couldn't focus on the market, he couldn't charm his clients, and he couldn't sleep. The financial fortress he had built was under siege. David Chen published the story 2 weeks later. The headline was devastating. The banker's secret. Did Sterling of Scottsdale buy silence on insider trading charges for 7 figures? The article, meticulously sourced using the information I had provided, detailed the collapse of the Delphi Fund, the accusations of fraud by Thomas Klein, and the verifiable timeline of the massive out-of-court settlement. David didn't directly violate the NDA, but he provided enough undeniable facts and legal context to render the secret public, toxic, and absolutely credible. The article didn't accuse Marcus of a crime. It merely asked the question that destroyed him. Can a man who pays millions to hide a fraud be trusted with your billions? The reaction was a financial detonation. Marcus's blue-chip clients, the wealthy, integrity-obsessed investors who formed the bedrock of his career, immediately began withdrawing their capital. His firm, built on the perception of his unassailable success, faced a liquidity crisis. He was no longer the celebrated banker. He was the scandal-plagued pariah, whose reputation was now irrevocably compromised. He called me that afternoon, his voice raw, stripped of all condescension, replaced by pure, desperate panic. "Serena, you did this! You sent that information! You're trying to ruin me!" I listened to his frantic accusations, the sound of his total professional collapse echoing through the line. "Marcus," I said, my voice ice cold, "I am simply seeking an equitable divorce settlement as you requested. The truth about your past, however, has a terrible way of surfacing when you try to discard the person who protected it for 25 years. I didn't give him a moment to breathe. I instructed Elena Ruiz to file a second, highly publicized legal motion, a request for expedited emergency discovery into all of Marcus Sterling's corporate and personal accounts for the last 10 years, citing the credible, documented allegations of securities fraud as a risk to the marital estate. The purpose of this motion wasn't discovery. It was to weaponize the legal system by forcing his entire professional past into the public eye, amplifying the media frenzy and ensuring that his reputation was not just damaged, but completely incinerated. The man who was once my husband was now desperately fighting for his financial life against the perfect, unyielding strategy of the woman he thought was a mere social ornament. The final, absolute collapse of Marcus Sterling's perfect life unfolded over the next 72 hours. The emergency discovery motion, once publicized by the financial news, was the final nail in his professional coffin. His firm's board, facing massive client withdrawals and the threat of an SEC inquiry fueled by the media frenzy, issued an ultimatum: resign immediately or face termination for cause. Marcus, left with no financial or political protection, chose the humiliation of resignation, stepping down as the celebrated CEO, his career over, his name irrevocably stained. He agreed to the settlement almost instantly. The divorce was finalized not on his terms, but on mine, entirely. I walked away with 100% of the equity in the mountain mansion, the asset he had fought so desperately to protect, along with a vast, non-negotiable financial package that was far beyond what I would have received in a normal divorce. The victory was total and absolute. I had not only regained my financial independence, but had forced him to publicly and legally acknowledge the value of my 25 years of labor. But the final necessary act was the emotional reckoning. I instructed Elena to schedule a private, court-mandated meeting to sign the final deeds and transfer documents. Marcus walked into the neutral law office, a defeated ghost, looking 30 years older than his actual age. His expensive suit hung loose. His hands trembled. He couldn't meet my eyes. My lawyer and his lawyer stood silent witnesses to the final scene. I slid the house deed, now signed over entirely to me, across the table. He flinched, seeing the physical proof of his greatest loss. "Serena," he whispered, his voice broken. "You won. You took everything. Was it worth it?" I looked at him, the man who had promised me forever and given me nothing but deceit and disdain, and I delivered my final, unscripted truth. "You promised me forever, and gave me a life built on a lie. You reduced my 25 years to a disposable asset. I didn't take everything, Marcus. I took the truth, the only thing you never valued. You are ruined not because I am vindictive, but because you are a fraud whose lie was finally exposed. Your forever ended in humiliation, because you were too arrogant to believe that the woman you discarded was the only one who truly understood your vulnerabilities. I signed the final documents, placed the deed in my purse, and walked out, leaving him alone with the cold, crushing silence of his self-inflicted ruin. The success of the Hayes Group was meteoric, fueled entirely by the constant public reminder of Marcus Sterling's total ruin. I was now operating in the same high-stakes financial arena he once dominated, but from the unassailable position of a sought-after expert whose integrity was beyond question. My story became a quiet, powerful marketing tool that guaranteed my firm access to the highest-tier clients, the very clients who had fled Marcus. I used my position to implement systemic changes in the way major firms vetted their executives. I developed a proprietary ethical vulnerability matrix, a consulting tool that specialized in identifying and mitigating the exact kind of Thomas Klein hidden liabilities that had destroyed Marcus. I was literally using the blueprint of his betrayal to create a product that protected others from similar professional fraud. My professional life was a continuous, triumphant contradiction of the ruin he had intended for me. My personal life, however, remained guarded. I never sought another long-term relationship. My focus was on cultivating a new circle of friends, women of substance, integrity, and independence, the polar opposite of the superficial, judgmental group that had abandoned me during the divorce. I learned the vital difference between shared history and true loyalty, and I built my new life on the latter. The years of silence had taught me the power of discernment, and I vowed never again to waste my time or my trust on those who valued appearance over honor. Marcus's ruin was absolute, but the most profound element of his punishment was his inability to escape the constant, powerful reminder of my success. The mountain mansion, his trophy of success, was now mine. My successful consulting firm, the Hayes Group, was now operating as a powerful, ethical corrective in the market he corrupted. Every facet of his former life was either legally seized or transformed into a symbol of my independence. He had promised me forever and gave me nothing, but in doing so, he had unwittingly handed me the weapons to ensure his complete and utter humiliation. The final, definitive act of my vindication came with the creation of the Marcus Sterling Fellowship. I used a significant portion of the mansion's refi equity to establish a major, endowed scholarship at the University of Arizona's Business School, specifically targeting students dedicated to ethical finance and corporate governance. The fellowship was named, with icy precision, after Marcus Sterling. The press release, handled by my own firm, stated simply that the fellowship was established to honor the painful lessons of integrity learned during a significant professional period in Mr. Sterling's life. The move was brilliant in its subtlety and devastating in its finality. I did not praise him. I did not condemn him. I simply used his name as a permanent public synonym for the consequences of corporate malfeasance. Every year, ambitious, ethical young students would receive funding in his name, dedicating their careers to correcting the very kind of fraud he committed. The fellowship was a living, breathing testament to his professional downfall, ensuring that his legacy was not success, but a cautionary tale of absolute moral failure. Marcus, operating somewhere in obscurity, tried one final, desperate act of sabotage. He sent an aggressive cease and desist letter to the university and the press, demanding that his name be removed from the fellowship, claiming the association was malicious and defamatory. The response was clinical and crushing. My lawyer simply cited the public record of his resignation, the SEC allegations, and the divorce settlement, confirming the context of the painful lessons the fellowship honored. The university, eager for the positive publicity and the significant endowment, refused to back down. Marcus, legally and financially neutered, was powerless. The man who had promised me forever was now permanently etched into the public record, not as a financial titan, but as the ghost of a fraud, his name repurposed to fund the very ethical standards he had spent his life violating. I had ensured his humiliation was not fleeting, but perpetual. The years that followed were marked by the flourishing of my purposeful life. The Hayes Group expanded its practice into the political arena, advising government committees on ethical vetting processes for financial appointees, a final, ironic completion of the circle, ensuring that the system that had protected Marcus now worked to enforce integrity. I had successfully transformed my personal trauma into systemic reform. I often held quiet evenings on the terrace of the mountain mansion, looking out at the sprawling, serene desert, reflecting on the profound shift in my life. The house, once a symbol of my gilded cage, was now a powerful reminder of my freedom. I realized that Marcus had, in his malice, given me the greatest gift, the clarity and the impetus to find my true strength. He thought I was a quiet, predictable wife. He was wrong. I was a professional strategist with the patience to wait for the perfect moment of exposure. I received a single, final piece of correspondence concerning Marcus years later. It was a formal notification from a small, low-profile bankruptcy court. Marcus Sterling had finally filed for complete personal bankruptcy, stripping him of the final, residual assets he had managed to hide. His ruin was not just professional or social. It was absolute financial oblivion. He was left with nothing, exactly what he had tried to leave me. I looked at the document, and I felt nothing but quiet, immense peace. I did not celebrate his final ruin. I simply acknowledged the end of the narrative. I had won the war, reclaimed my life, and built a legacy of integrity far stronger and more resilient than the lie he had constructed. The shame was gone, replaced by the unshakable certainty of my self-worth. The final definitive act of my vindication came with the creation of the Marcus Sterling Fellowship. I used a significant portion of the mansion's refi equity to establish a major endowed scholarship at the University of Arizona's Business School, specifically targeting students dedicated to ethical finance and corporate governance. The fellowship was named, with icy precision, after Marcus Sterling. The press release, handled by my own firm, stated simply that the fellowship was established to honor the painful lessons of integrity learned during a significant professional period in Mr. Sterling's life. The move was brilliant in its subtlety and devastating in its finality. I did not praise him. I did not condemn him. I simply used his name as a permanent public synonym for the consequences of corporate malfeasance. Every year, ambitious, ethical young students would receive funding in his name, dedicating their careers to correcting the very kind of fraud he committed. The fellowship was a living, breathing testament to his professional downfall, ensuring that his legacy was not success, but a cautionary tale of absolute moral failure. Marcus, operating somewhere in obscurity, tried one final desperate act of sabotage. He sent an aggressive cease and desist letter to the university and the press, demanding that his name be removed from the fellowship. Claiming the association was malicious and defamatory, the response was clinical and crushing. My lawyer simply cited the public record of his resignation, the SEC allegations, and the divorce settlement, confirming the context of the painful lessons the fellowship honored. The university, eager for the positive publicity and the significant endowment, refused to back down. Marcus, legally and financially neutered, was powerless. The man who had promised me forever was now permanently etched into the public record, not as a financial titan, but as the ghost of a fraud, his name repurposed to fund the very ethical standards he had spent his life violating. I had ensured his humiliation was not fleeting, but perpetual. The years that followed were marked by the flourishing of my purposeful life. The Hayes Group expanded its practice into the political arena, advising government committees on ethical vetting processes for financial appointees, a final ironic completion of the circle, ensuring that the system that had protected Marcus now worked to enforce integrity. I had successfully transformed my personal trauma into systemic reform. I often held quiet evenings on the terrace of the mountain mansion, looking out at the sprawling, serene desert, reflecting on the profound shift in my life. The house, once a symbol of my gilded cage, was now a powerful reminder of my freedom. I realized that Marcus had, in his malice, given me the greatest gift, the clarity and the impetus to find my true strength. He thought I was a quiet, predictable wife. He was wrong. I was a professional strategist, with the patience to wait for the perfect moment of exposure. I received a single, final piece of correspondence concerning Marcus years later. It was a formal notification from a small, low-profile bankruptcy court. Marcus Sterling had finally filed for complete, personal bankruptcy, stripping him of the final, residual assets he had managed to hide. His ruin was not just professional or social. It was absolute financial oblivion. He was left with nothing, exactly what he had tried to leave me. I looked at the document, and I felt nothing but quiet, immense peace. I did not celebrate his final ruin. I simply acknowledged the end of the narrative. I had won the war, reclaimed my life, and built a legacy of integrity far stronger and more resilient than the lie he had constructed. The shame was gone, replaced by the unshakable certainty of my self-worth. The final, definitive act of my vindication came with the creation of the Marcus Sterling Fellowship. I used a significant portion of the mansion's refi equity to establish a major endowed scholarship at the University of Arizona's Business School, specifically targeting students dedicated to ethical finance and corporate governance. The fellowship was named, with icy precision, after Marcus Sterling. The press release, handled by my own firm, stated simply that the fellowship was established to honor the painful lessons of integrity learned during a significant professional period in Mr. Sterling's life. The move was brilliant in its subtlety and devastating in its finality. I did not praise him. I did not condemn him. I simply used his name as a permanent public synonym for the consequences of corporate malfeasance. Every year, ambitious, ethical young students would receive funding in his name, dedicating their careers to correcting the very kind of fraud he committed. The fellowship was a living, breathing testament to his professional downfall, ensuring that his legacy was not success, but a cautionary tale of absolute moral failure. Marcus, operating somewhere in obscurity, tried one final, desperate act of sabotage. He sent an aggressive cease-and-desist letter to the university and the press, demanding that his name be removed from the fellowship, claiming the association was malicious and defamatory. The response was clinical and crushing. My lawyer simply cited the public record of his resignation, the SEC allegations, and the divorce settlement, confirming the context of the painful lessons the fellowship honored. The university, eager for the positive publicity and the significant endowment, refused to back down. Marcus, legally and financially neutered, was powerless. The man who had promised me forever was now permanently etched into the public record, not as a financial titan, but as the ghost of a fraud, his name repurposed to fund the very ethical standards he had spent his life violating. I had ensured his humiliation was not fleeting, but perpetual. My life today is proof that the greatest professional successes can be born from the deepest personal betrayals. I stand here, not as the discarded wife, but as Serena Hayes, the CEO of the Hayes Group, the woman who used strategic clarity to dismantle a financial empire. Marcus Sterling promised me forever and gave me nothing but deceit and disdain. He thought I was broken and finished. He was simply blind to the quiet, analytical strength that lay beneath the surface. I used the map of his vulnerabilities, the secrets he trusted me to keep, to orchestrate a total, legal, and social humiliation. I forced his name to be synonymous with fraud, seized his most prized asset, and permanently cemented his legacy as a cautionary tale through the very fellowship that bears his name. He is ruined because his foundation was a lie. I am successful because my foundation is the truth. The ultimate victory is not the money or the title, but the perpetual peace that comes from knowing you fought for your dignity and secured your future on a bedrock of unassailable self-respect. He promised me forever and gave me nothing, so I made sure his forever ended in humiliation and, most importantly, in permanent obscurity.